His lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words, just 5. And Vincent's face, that smug, self-satisfied face I'd stared at across the breakfast table for 15 years, went completely white. His hands started trembling. The papers he'd been so eager to sign were shaking like leaves in a storm. And me? For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how we got here. How a woman everyone thought had lost her mind actually played the longest, most patient game of her life. My name is Alexis Dunst. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Vincent Mercer. 15 years of marriage. That's longer than most Hollywood relationships, longer than some small countries have existed, and definitely longer than my patience should have lasted. But I'm a stubborn woman. I get it from my grandmother. I met Vincent when I was 17. I'd graduated high school early, not because I was some genius, but because I was practical and motivated and really, really wanted to get out of my parents' house. I got a job at Henderson and Price Law Firm as a file clerk. Minimum wage, maximum paper cuts, but it was mine. By 18, I'd worked my way up to legal assistant. I was good with details, good with numbers, good with keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open. Vincent was 24 when we met at a client event. Charming, ambitious, full of dreams about building a real estate empire. He talked about the future like it was already his, like success was just waiting for him to show up and claim it. He said he was going to build something incredible. I said I'd help him file the paperwork. Romance, right? We got married when I was 19. Tyler came along when I was 20. I kept working at the law firm part-time while raising our son, building up my 401k, saving every spare dollar. My grandmother always said a woman should have her own money, not secret money, she'd clarify. Just her own, something nobody could take. At 23, Vincent's business finally took off. He asked me to quit the law firm and help him full-time. He needed someone to manage the books, handle clients, coordinate with contractors, someone he could trust completely. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator for model homes, marketing coordinator, event planner. I did it all while raising Tyler, managing our household, and somehow keeping everyone fed and reasonably happy. My official title was wife. My unofficial title was everything else. For 11 years, I poured myself into building Vincent's dream. And for 11 years, he got the credit, the awards, the recognition. At every industry event, I was Vincent's wife. At every celebration, he thanked his team, his mentors, his vision. But somehow never quite got around to thanking me. Somewhere along the way, things shifted. He started making decisions without consulting me. Started staying late for work more and more often. Started criticizing little things, the way I dressed, the meals I cooked, my lack of ambition. I was running his entire back office for free while raising his son and keeping his life organized. But sure, not ambitious enough. Then, 3 months ago, he dropped the bomb. He came home on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner, his favorite, actually, because I'm apparently a glutton for unappreciated effort. He sat me down at the kitchen table with this look on his face, not sad, not apologetic, just businesslike. I want a divorce, he said. And then, I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Tyler. He said it like he was ordering from a menu. I'll have the assets. Hold the child, thanks. Keep Tyler? Like our 15-year-old son was a leftover pizza? Like he was an inconvenience being graciously allowed to stay with me? I just stared at him. 15 years of marriage. And this was how it ended, at our kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, like I was just another item he was discarding. What I didn't know in that moment, what I wouldn't find out until later, was that Vincent had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer, Harold Whitfield, expensive and experienced. He'd been building his exit strategy while I was meal prepping and scheduling his dentist appointments. I'd been blindsided by a man I'd trusted with everything. The next day, his mother showed up, Lorraine Mercer, a woman who had treated me like the help for 15 years, arrived with her perfectly styled hair and her perfectly practiced sympathy face. She patted my hand and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. Men have needs, dear, she said. like she was explaining something complicated to a slow child. Lorraine's advice on marriage was always fascinating, considering her husband spent 7 days a week on the golf course specifically to avoid being in the same room as her. But sure, I was the problem. That first week was a blur. Vincent moved me to the guest room. He had documents drawn up, settlements proposed, timelines established. Everything was moving so fast, and I felt like I was drowning. Everyone saw a woman whose world had just collapsed, a wife being thrown away after 15 years of service, a victim who didn't see it coming. But here's the thing. What Vincent didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd found something 3 years ago, something buried in his own financial records, something he thought was hidden forever. And I'd been quietly, patiently preparing ever since. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. Thank you. Back to the disaster. Within a week of the announcement, Vincent had completely taken control. The guest room became my permanent residence in what used to be our home. My closet shrank from a walk-in to 2 small sections he graciously allowed me to keep. The message was clear. This isn't your house anymore. Within 2 weeks, he started bringing her around. Brittany Sawyer, 27 years old, worked at his company. Of course she did. She had that Instagram perfect look. Blonde highlights, perfect nails, yoga pants that cost more than my weekly groceries. She walked into my kitchen like she owned it, wore my apron, my grandmother's apron, while making smoothies in my blender. She was younger than my marriage, younger than my favorite handbag, but she made amazing smoothies, so I guess that's something. Vincent paraded her around like a trophy. They'd sit on my couch, watch my television, eat off my plates. He'd put his arm around her right in front of me, like I was furniture, like I'd already disappeared. The humiliation escalated daily. First, he canceled my personal credit card. We need to separate finances, he said, like he was being reasonable. Then the joint card. Then he suggested I should probably find somewhere else to stay while we sorted things out. My own home, and I was being asked to leave. Lorraine came over to help me pack. And by help, I mean she went through my belongings and decided what I deserved to keep. Old clothes, fine. Family photos, some of them. My grandmother's recipe box? She hesitated on that one, like she was considering claiming it for herself. What I was not allowed to take. Any jewelry Vincent had bought me over 15 years. Any furniture I'd picked out. Anything of value. Those were marital assets, Lorraine explained, and Vincent was entitled to them. She packed my things in garbage bags. Not boxes, garbage bags. Like I was trash being taken out. Through all of this, I had one person I thought I could trust, Diane Holloway. We'd been friends since high school. 20 years of friendship, through boyfriends and breakups and babies and everything in between. She was the first person I called after Vincent's announcement. She was so supportive, always checking in, always asking how I was holding up, always ready to listen. She'd come over with wine and let me cry on her shoulder. She told me I deserved better. She told me Vincent was making a huge mistake. But something felt off. Little things at first. Vincent seemed to know my plans before I made them. When I mentioned to Diane that I was thinking about fighting for the house, Tyler came home the next day saying Dad told him it wouldn't work. When I told Diane I was looking at apartments in a specific neighborhood, Vincent made a comment about that exact area being too expensive for me. Then it clicked. Looking back, I should have seen it years ago. The way Diane always lit up when Vincent walked into the room. The way she'd compliment him just a little too much, laugh at his jokes just a little too hard. She always asked about him first whenever we talked. How's Vincent? How's the business? Is Vincent happy? She'd been carrying a torch for my husband for 15 years. And Vincent, because he collected admirers like some people collect stamps, knew exactly how to use it. He made her feel special, important, not like other women. He probably implied they'd get together after the divorce, gave her just enough hope to keep her loyal. My best friend was his spy. 20 years of friendship sold out for some flirting and empty promises. At least charge more, Diane. But the worst part wasn't Vincent, wasn't Lorraine, wasn't even Diane. The worst part was Tyler. My son saw everything. The girlfriend, the grandmother packing my bags, The way his father looked at me like I was nothing, and Vincent was working on him, dripping poison in his ear day after day. Your mom is making this difficult. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. I'm trying to be fair, but she won't cooperate. Tyler started pulling away from me. Not angry, exactly, just distant, confused. He didn't know who to believe, and his father was very, very convincing. I could lose the house, I could lose the money, I could lose everything I'd spent 15 years building, but watching my son look at me like I was the problem, that was the knife. That was the wound that actually bled. I hired a lawyer, Nina Castellano, recommended by my old firm. 52 years old, sharp as a razor, absolutely no tolerance for nonsense. She reviewed my situation and laid out the battle plan. You helped build this business, she said. You're entitled to half of everything. The house, the company, the accounts. We fight. I looked at her for a long moment. What if I don't want to fight? Nina stared at me like I'd started speaking another language, like I'd suggested we send Vincent a thank you card and a fruit basket. She thought I was broken, depressed, too beaten down to stand up for myself. She had no idea. I moved into a small apartment with Tyler, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of my old pantry. Half our boxes didn't even fit. They sat stacked in the corner of Tyler's room, like a monument to how far we'd fallen. Meanwhile, Vincent posted photos with Brittany. New chapter, new energy, blessed, he wrote. Lorraine commented underneath, so happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve joy. My sister called, furious. You need a shark lawyer. Take him for everything he's worth. Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who'd given up, who couldn't fight, who was letting her husband walk all over her. Everyone was wrong. Here's the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching you. They stop being careful around you. They stop guarding their secrets. And that's exactly when you learn everything you need to know. 3 years. That's how long I'd been carrying this secret. That's how long I'd known the truth about Vincent Mercer and his glittering, glamorous, completely fake empire. It started on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before the divorce. Vincent was working late again. He was always working late by then, though I didn't yet know what that really meant. I was going through the company books, reconciling accounts, doing the unglamorous work that kept his business running. And I found something strange. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize, then another, then a pattern. Money flowing out of our accounts into places I'd never seen before. I dug deeper. I stayed up until 3 a.m, following the trail. What I found made my blood run cold. Vincent had been taking loans against everything we owned. The house, our beautiful house that everyone admired, had 3 mortgages on it. The original loan of $400,000, a second mortgage of $350,000 taken out 4 years ago, a third mortgage of another $350,000 taken out 2 years ago. Total owed $1.1 million. Actual value of the house, $850,000. We were underwater by $250,000 on a home I thought we owned outright. The business was even worse. Lines of credit maxed out at $200,000, back taxes owed of $85,000, vendor debts of $120,000, equipment loans of $75,000. The company Vincent bragged about at every party, the company that was supposedly thriving, it was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars weren't real. All 3 were leased with balloon payments coming due. We didn't own anything. We just had very expensive monthly obligations. I sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m, surrounded by printouts, and did the math. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Total actual asset value, maybe $1.6 million. We were $300,000 in the hole, maybe more. But where had all the money gone? I kept digging. Over the following weeks, I traced every transaction I could find, and the picture that emerged was devastating. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000, all lost. Gambling, $75,000, gone. An apartment I didn't know about. Rented for a woman I didn't know about. $60,000 in rent and furnishings. Lifestyle expenses that never made it home. Watches, suits, trips I was never invited on. Another $85,000. My husband wasn't building an empire. He was building a house of cards with borrowed cards that were also on fire. We looked rich the same way a mannequin looks alive, convincing from a distance, completely hollow up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But I knew Vincent. I'd watched him operate for years. If I confronted him, he'd manipulate me. He'd explain it away, make me feel crazy for questioning him. He'd probably find a way to blame me for it. And worse, if he knew I knew, he might try to take control of my separate money, too. See, I'd always kept a little something of my own, my grandmother's voice in my head. A woman should have her own money, my IRA from my law firm years. I'd rolled it over when I quit, but never touched it. By then it had grown to about $180,000. That was mine, earned from my job. Separate property under the law. And then there was Grandma herself. She'd passed away when I was 28, and she'd left me $340,000. Her will was specific. This money is for Alexis alone. I'd kept it in a separate account for 6 years, never commingling it with Vincent's finances, never using it for household expenses. My grandmother kept her own account for 50 years. Not secret money, she'd always say, just mine. Smartest woman I ever knew. I had roughly $520,000 that was completely, legally, separately mine. So I didn't confront Vincent. Instead, I protected myself. I worked with my uncle, a retired accountant, to create an irrevocable trust for Tyler. My IRA and my inheritance went into that trust. My name wasn't on it as a beneficiary. Vincent's name certainly wasn't on it. It was for Tyler's future, college, a first home, emergencies. And it was untouchable. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage document, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction. I printed copies and kept them at my sister's house. I put copies in a safe deposit box. I saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then I waited. I knew Vincent would leave eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, or they find someone younger, or they decide they deserve more. I just had to be ready when it happened. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of watching him dig the hole deeper. 3 years of smiling at dinner parties while knowing our entire life was built on quicksand. I got very good at patience and very good at pretending I didn't know my husband was financially drowning us both. When Vincent finally asked for the divorce, when he demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I almost laughed out loud. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the present, I sat across from Nina Castellano and placed 3 binders on her desk. 3 years of evidence. Every mortgage document, every loan statement, every hidden account. She read in silence for almost an hour. When she finally looked up, her expression had completely transformed. "You've known about this for 3 years?" I was waiting for him to leave. I knew he would eventually. And when he demanded everything, he demanded all the debt. He just doesn't understand that yet. Nina leaned back in her chair. The pity was gone from her eyes. The concern was gone. What replaced it was something like awe. So when you sign over the assets, I walk away clean. He gets the mortgages, the business debts, the lease obligations. All of it becomes his sole responsibility. And your inheritance, your retirement account, separate property, never commingled, legally protected, sitting safely in a trust for my son. Nina was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Mrs. Dunst," she said, "I believe I owe you an apology. I thought you'd given up." I smiled back. "Everyone thinks that. That's kind of the point." Nina went from looking at me like a lost kitten to looking at me like a chess grandmaster. I prefer grandmaster, better outfit. The trap was already built, the numbers were verified, the documentation was airtight. All I had to do now was let Vincent think he was winning. And nobody does gracious loser better than a woman who's been practicing for 15 years. The next 3 months were a masterclass in acting. I became exactly what everyone expected me to be: broken, defeated, barely holding on. I showed up to mediation sessions with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly, hesitantly, like a woman who'd lost all her confidence. I asked for so little that even the mediator seemed uncomfortable. "I just want enough to start over. I said during our second mediation. I'm not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear our family apart more than it already is. I requested a settlement of $50,000 cash, my personal belongings. Shared custody of Tyler, that was it. Vincent agreed immediately. He was probably expecting me to fight for half of everything. That's what any reasonable lawyer would demand. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across that mediation table with something almost like pity. Like I was a wounded animal he was graciously putting out of its misery. I deserved an Oscar for that performance, or at least a Golden Globe. I was giving the role of a lifetime, and my only audience was my lying, cheating, soon-to-be bankrupt ex-husband. With each passing week, Vincent's arrogance grew. He stopped being careful, stopped pretending to be the reasonable one. He started telling everyone who would listen that I hadn't even fought. She just gave up, he told his golf buddies. I offered her a fair settlement, and she took it without a word. Lorraine was even worse. She bragged at her book club, at her church group, at every social gathering she attended. Vincent is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son. To celebrate his upcoming victory, Vincent bought himself a new watch, $15,000. I know because I saw the charge on the business account. He was still using company money for personal expenses, still digging that hole deeper. He wore it to our next mediation session, making sure I noticed. He also took Brittany to dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted photos on social media. "Life is good when you're with the right person," he wrote. The right person. He meant the person who didn't know about his debt, yet. Meanwhile, Brittany had started redecorating my house. New furniture in the living room. New art on the walls. She even painted my kitchen. Gray. She painted it gray. I spent 3 weeks choosing that sage green. 3 weeks of paint samples and lighting tests and driving myself crazy trying to get the perfect shade. And she painted over it with builder-grade gray. Like it was nothing. Gray. Like her personality, like her future with Vincent once she found out he was broke. Very fitting, actually. Diane kept calling, fishing for information under the guise of friendship. I played along perfectly. "How are you holding up?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I just want it to be over," I'd tell her, making my voice crack slightly. "I can't fight anymore, I don't have the energy." Within hours, Vincent would know. I could practically see him relaxing, letting his guard down even further. Diane thought she was playing me. She was actually just being a messenger service, not a very expensive one either. But while the adults were playing their games, Tyler was watching, and my son, my smart, observant, wonderful son, was starting to notice things that didn't add up. He noticed his dad's new $15,000 watch, but heard Vincent tell him they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Brittany's shopping bags piling up in the foyer, but heard Vincent complain about money being tight. He noticed the disconnect between the lifestyle his father was projecting and the excuses he kept making. One evening, Tyler came to my tiny apartment and sat down at my secondhand kitchen table. He looked at me with those serious eyes, so much like his father's, but with something Vincent had lost long ago. Honesty. "Mom," he said quietly, "is Dad actually rich?" I looked at my son for a long moment. "What do you think?" He was quiet, processing. "I think something's not right. I think he's pretending." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Trust me, just wait a little longer." My 15-year-old figured out something was wrong before 2 lawyers and a certified accountant did. I should bill his college fund for consulting fees. Behind the scenes, Nina was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement stated clearly that I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would go to Vincent. In exchange, I would receive my modest cash settlement and walk away, but attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets. When Vincent signed for all assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations on the cars would be his problem alone. It was all there in black and white. Legal, Proper. Devastating. Legal documents are like poetry, Nina told me. Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favorite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Harold Whitfield, Vincent's lawyer, called Nina with concerns. My client is assuming significant assets, Harold said carefully. I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to verify everything. Nina kept her voice neutral. Of course. We'll provide whatever documentation you need, but when Harold brought this to Vincent, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. No audits, Vincent told him. I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know. Harold pushed back. I strongly recommend we verify the asset values before you sign. This is a significant no. Vincent cut him off. Brittany wants this done. I want this done. No more delays. Harold had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a mistake. He also knew he couldn't force someone to take his advice. He presented Vincent with a waiver, a document acknowledging that Harold had recommended an independent financial review and that Vincent was declining against counsel's advice. Vincent signed it without reading it, just like he'd sign everything else without reading it. Never underestimate the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Brittany was worth millions to me, in legal strategy anyway. The night before the hearing, Vincent sent me a text message. Thank you for not making this ugly. I stared at that message for a long time. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building his business, raising his son, managing his life. And he was thanking me for not making things difficult for him while he threw me away. I typed back, I just want what's best for Tyler. What was best for Tyler? His trust fund, his future secured, and a father who was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Nina called me that evening, Thursday at 9 a.m. Final hearing. Judge Patricia Holden. Are you ready? I looked around my small apartment. The secondhand furniture, the boxes still unpacked in the corner, the tiny kitchen I'd painted sage green because it reminded me of hope. I've been ready for 3 years. 3 years of waiting, and it was finally here. I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. If Christmas morning involved divorce court and financial revenge, Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Vincent would walk into that courtroom expecting to collect his prize. He had no idea he was about to inherit a financial avalanche, one he'd signed for himself, and the best part? He'd asked for it, in writing, with witnesses. If you've made it this far, you already know something satisfying is coming. Hit that like button if you're ready for Vincent to get what he deserves. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? I've got more stories where this came from. Trust me. Now let's finish this. Thursday, April 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I remember every detail of that morning, the way the sunlight came through the tall windows, the smell of old wood and floor polish, the quiet murmur of lawyers shuffling papers. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Vincent arrived first, of course. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani I'd helped him pick out for a client dinner 3 years ago. His new watch caught the light as he shook hands with Harold. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close a very favorable deal. Brittany was waiting in the hallway. She wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but she wanted to be there for moral support. I caught a glimpse of her through the door. Perfect makeup, designer bag, scrolling through her phone like this was just another boring appointment. Lorraine was there, too, sitting in the gallery. She dressed up for the occasion, probably planning to take Vincent to a celebratory lunch afterward. She looked at me when I walked in and gave me this little smile, the kind you give someone you've already beaten. I arrived a few minutes after Vincent. Simple navy dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a low bun. I looked tired, defeated, like a woman who had nothing left to fight for. Perfect. I looked like someone who'd given up on life and fashion simultaneously. Very convincing. I should really teach acting classes. Judge Patricia Holden entered, and everyone rose. She was in her early 60s, silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. 30 years on the family court bench. She'd seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie that divorcing couples could throw at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. Mercer versus Mercer. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement? Harold stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Vincent Mercer, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Dunst receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Nina rose beside me. That's correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Holden's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a moment, looking for signs of coercion, I imagine, signs that I was being pressured into a bad deal. Mrs. Dunst, she said, I need to confirm that you understand what you're agreeing to today. You're giving up your claim to substantial property, the family home, the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is pressuring you? No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands, then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another long moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push harder, whether to order a continuance, whether to protect me from what looked like a terrible decision. But I was represented by counsel. I was answering clearly. I was an adult woman making my own choice. Very well, she said finally. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents, page after page of legal language, signatures required on every third page. Vincent signed eagerly, barely glancing at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life with his new girlfriend and his new freedom. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise. This was the moment I'd been waiting 3 years for. I was going to savor it. Across the courtroom, I saw Vincent glance at Lorraine and smile. She nodded back approvingly. In the hallway, his phone buzzed, probably Brittany sending encouragement. He checked his phone in court, during his own divorce hearing. That's the kind of man he was. Meanwhile, Harold Whitfield was doing what good lawyers do, reviewing the complete document package one final time. Main agreements signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read, watched the confusion flicker across his features, watched him flip back a page, then forward again, like he was hoping he'd misread something. He hadn't. Harold's face went pale. He leaned toward Vincent, trying to be discreet. Sir, he whispered, we need to talk. Vincent waved him off, still basking in his victory. Not now. We're almost done. Sir Harold's voice was more urgent. You're assuming all debt. Vincent turned to look at him. What? The liability disclosure, Harold whispered, papers rustling as he pointed. The mortgages, the business liens. It's all here. You're assuming personal liability for everything. For the first time, Vincent actually looked at what he'd signed. I watched his eyes scan the numbers, watched the color drain from his face. House, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $850,000. Business, $480,000 in combined debts. Vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities, $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value of everything he'd just claimed, negative $300,000. He hadn't won the lottery. He'd won the bill for it. Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right. He looked at me, then at the judge, then back at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Holden's voice was sharp. Mr. Mercer, sit down. These numbers are fake, Vincent insisted, his voice rising. She manipulated the documents. This is Mr. Mercer. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. He sat, but his hands were shaking. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. Judge Holden looked at the documents in front of her, then at Vincent. Mr. Mercer, I'm looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with assets you are claiming, assets in your name, your business, your property. She fixed him with a hard stare. Are you telling this court that you don't know your own financial situation? Silence. Watching Vincent try to explain why he didn't know about his own debts was like watching a cat explain why there's a broken vase on the floor. Fascinating and completely unconvincing. Harold cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He produced the waiver, the one Vincent had signed without reading, the one that said, in clear legal language, that Harold had recommended a full audit, and Vincent had refused. Judge Holden reviewed it briefly, so Mr. Mercer was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Vincent. Is that correct? Vincent was staring at the waiver like it was a snake that had just bitten him. I thought, is that your signature, Mr. Mercer? A long pause. Yes. Then you assumed this risk voluntarily. Judge Holden's voice was matter of fact. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The agreement stands. Vincent turned to me, desperation breaking through his composure. You knew. His voice cracked. You knew about all of this. I met his eyes calmly. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Vincent. I knew about everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally, the one I'd been waiting for, realization, the understanding that he'd done this to himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Vincent said, turning back to the judge. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head. Mr. Mercer, you signed documents before this court stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review. Your wife did not hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused. The agreement is final. The gavel came down. Mrs. Dunst, you have your settlement. Mr. Mercer, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothed my dress, picked up my purse. Then I looked at Vincent one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his whole world collapsing around him. You said you wanted everything except Tyler, I said quietly. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Vincent's voice rising, yelling at Harold, demanding to know how this happened, threatening lawsuits, Harold's calm responses. I told you to get an audit. I have it in writing. You refused. Through the glass doors, I saw Brittany's face change as she listened, saw her look at Vincent, really look at him, and see something other than the successful businessman she'd thought she was getting. She was gone before I reached the elevator, moving fast, heels clicking on the marble floor, not looking back. Brittany's exit was faster than her entrance into my marriage. At least she was consistent. I stepped outside into the April sunshine. The sky was blue. The air was warm. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was screaming at his lawyer about fairness and fraud and how none of this was his fault. Ahead of me was a new life, smaller than before, simpler, but completely, entirely mine. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Brittany had moved out of the house, packed her things in the middle of the night, left a note that said, "This isn't what I signed up for." The gray kitchen sat empty. Within a month, Vincent tried to sell the house. But when you owe more than something is worth, there are no buyers. Just banks calling about missed payments and realtors suggesting short sales. Within 2 months, the business started defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. The company that Vincent had spent 15 years building, the company I had spent 11 years supporting, was crumbling into dust. Within 3 months, Vincent was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who'd once bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets he could protect from creditors. The answer was almost nothing. Lorraine's perfect son was calling family members asking for loans, showing up at relatives' houses with excuses and explanations. Nobody knew about the debt. Alexis must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked. But the documents told a different story. The mortgages were in his name. The loans were in his name. The gambling debts, the crypto losses, the secret apartment, all his choices, all his signatures. I heard that Lorraine's Christmas newsletter that year was very short. Vincent is exploring new opportunities. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. The parallel conflicts resolve themselves with a kind of poetic symmetry. Diane called me about a week after the hearing. Her voice was shaking. I had no idea things were this bad. I'm so sorry, Alexis. I never meant for... I thought Vincent and I didn't answer, didn't respond, didn't give her the closure she was looking for. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired. Some friendships don't deserve a second chance. 20 years of history betrayed for a wink and empty promises from a man who used everyone around him. She tried calling 3 more times. Then she stopped. I imagine she's still waiting for Vincent to notice her. She'll be waiting a long time. Lorraine tried a different approach, going through Tyler. Tell your mother I didn't know about the money problems. Tell her I'm sorry for how I treated her. Tell her I want to talk. Tyler looked at his grandmother, the woman who'd packed his mother's belongings in garbage bags, who'd called his mother worthless, who'd sided with his father without a single question, and said, Mom's busy building her life. She doesn't have time for excuses. Lorraine wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? Tyler, my wonderful, smart, observant son. He finally understood everything, not because I explained it, but because he figured it out himself. He saw the court documents. He heard his father's excuses. He watched Brittany leave, watched Lorraine scramble, watched the whole facade collapse. One evening, about a month after the divorce, he sat with me in my small apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, the one with the secondhand furniture and the boxes finally unpacked. You waited 3 years, he said quietly. You knew this whole time and you just waited. I wanted to make sure you were protected, I told him. Whatever happened between your father and me, I needed to know you'd be okay. The trust fund. $520,000 safe and untouchable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he hugged me, really hugged me. The kind of hug I hadn't gotten from my 15-year-old son in months. The kind that said, I understand. The kind that said, I'm proud of you. 15-year-old boys don't usually hug their mothers voluntarily. I knew I'd done something right. My $50,000 settlement went toward getting established. First month's rent, security deposit, basic furniture that wasn't falling apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was. Tyler's future, college, maybe a first home someday, a safety net that nobody could take from him. And me, I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, the dream I'd put on hold when I was 23 to help Vincent build his empire. I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Sandra, 52 years old, just ending a 28-year marriage. She was standing in her empty new apartment looking lost. When she asked me, how do you start over? I thought about it for a moment. One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. Happy tears, she said. The color of new beginnings. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Vincent showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. Not the healthy kind. Dark circles under his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. His watch was gone. He looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. He stood in my doorway, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I didn't know it was this bad, he said. His voice was hoarse. I made mistakes. I know that now. But I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned against my doorframe and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved for almost half my life. This man who'd thrown me away like garbage. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. Can we talk? He asked. Maybe we can figure something out. I don't know. Maybe we could. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Couldn't bring himself to ask for what he actually wanted. Help. My help. After everything. You asked for everything except Tyler, I said calmly. You got exactly what you wanted. Alexis, please. Goodbye, Vincent. I closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. Best show I'd ever seen. 5 stars. Would watch again. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. The recipe box was next to it. The one thing Lorraine had almost taken. The one thing that mattered most. You were right about everything, Grandma, I said quietly. Keep your own money. Know your worth. And never let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet, small. Nothing like the house I'd lived in for 15 years, but it was mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision, mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You will love it. See you in the next story. You're nothing but a charity case, an unwanted baby my mother took in because she felt guilty. Those words hit me harder than watching my parents' caskets lower into the ground. My sister Cassandra waited until everyone was walking to their cars after the service to destroy everything I thought I knew about myself. I'm Alana Whitehead. I'm 29 years old, and I live in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, where everyone knows everyone and secrets have a way of becoming headlines at the local coffee shop. 3 days ago, my parents, Robert and Linda, died when a drunk driver ran a red light during a thunderstorm. They were coming home from their 40th anniversary dinner, probably holding hands like they always did at stoplights. One moment they were here, the next they were gone, and now I was learning that maybe they were never really mine to lose. Before I continue, please hit that like button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you! The funeral reception was being held in our church's community hall, the same place where I'd had my first communion, where my Girl Scout troop used to meet, where I thought I belonged. I was standing by the coffee station stirring sugar into that terrible church coffee that somehow tastes like disappointment and furniture polish when Cassandra approached with the determination of someone about to drop a bomb. She was 35, 6 years older than me, and she'd always wielded those years like a weapon. Today, she looked around the room, making sure Aunt Dorothy was across the hall with the other relatives, then started her attack. She told me Mom and Dad had hidden the truth my whole life, that I wasn't their biological child, that I was the product of Mom's mistake before she even met Dad. According to Cassandra, they'd only kept me because the adoption agency had already placed me, and Mom was too embarrassed to admit she'd changed her mind. The room seemed to tilt. Several relatives were close enough to hear, and I saw Cousin Brooke already typing on her phone, probably spreading the news through our family group chat like wildfire. Cassandra's face was strange, her recent Botox treatment preventing any real expression while she delivered each revelation like a prosecutor presenting evidence. She couldn't even fake tears properly, her forehead frozen in what looked like perpetual surprise while she destroyed my world. She explained how it all made sense if I just thought about it. She'd gotten ballet lessons at the expensive studio downtown, while I did gymnastics at the YMCA. She'd gone to private school while I went to public. She'd gotten a car for her 16th birthday while I got Dad's old Honda when I turned 18, and only because he'd bought himself a new truck. She'd studied abroad in Paris while I spent my semester working at the hardware store to help with my community college tuition. The evidence had been there all along, she said. I'd just been too naive to see it. Aunt Dorothy had noticed something was happening and started pushing through the crowd toward us, but Cassandra wasn't finished. She pulled out a folder she'd been carrying in her designer purse, though I noticed the logo spelled Channel instead of Chanel, and waved it like a victory flag. She announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that Mom and Dad's estate was worth $3.2 million between the house, Dad's hardware business, and their investments. Then she delivered what she clearly thought was the killing blow. As their only biological child, she was inheriting everything, and I was getting nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because blood mattered and I didn't have theirs. The hall erupted in whispers. Aunt Dorothy reached us and immediately started arguing with Cassandra about decency and timing, while Cousin Brooke backed Cassandra up, saying everyone had suspected I was different anyway. Different, like I was some kind of imposter who'd been caught. Cassandra then informed me I had 30 days to move out of the family home where I'd been living for the past 2 years, while saving money and helping Mom with her arthritis, and Dad with the business. She said she was being generous, that legally she could have me out tomorrow. That night, I sat in what I'd thought was my childhood bedroom, staring at photos that suddenly felt like lies. There was one on my 5th birthday where Cassandra stood perfectly centered in her pristine pink dress, while I was off to the side with chocolate cake on my face, wearing something that looked obviously secondhand. Had Mom and Dad just been going through the motions? Had every birthday wish, every goodnight kiss, every proud smile at my graduation been an act? My best friend Megan texted immediately, having heard through the town's impressive gossip network. She said I should fight back, hire a lawyer, not let Cassandra steal my life. But my boyfriend, Jake, called with different advice, suggesting maybe it was better to walk away, that fighting over money would make me just as ugly as Cassandra was being. I wanted to scream at him that this wasn't about money, but about identity, about belonging, about discovering that maybe I'd never had a real family at all. The next morning, I heard Cassandra downstairs talking to a locksmith about changing the locks. She wanted the fancy electronic ones, but had brought the wrong key to copy, an old padlock key instead of the house key, and the locksmith had to explain 3 times that he couldn't make a house key from a gym locker key. It would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. Later, she left me a formal eviction notice delivered by her husband Derek, who couldn't meet my eyes and mumbled an apology before practically running back to his car. The next few days passed in a blur of revelations and humiliations. I found myself examining every memory through this new lens, seeing signs everywhere I'd been, too trusting to notice before. That time, Dad had said, family isn't about blood, it's about showing up. I'd thought he was just being philosophical. Mom's insistence that I was special, that I was chosen for great things, now sounded like guilt speaking. Even the way they'd sometimes look at me with this soft sadness made sense now that I knew they were seeing someone else's child. Cassandra wasted no time establishing her new reign. She'd already been to the bank trying to access Mom and Dad's accounts, though she'd been turned away pending proper documentation. She'd called Dad's business manager at the hardware store, informing him that there would be changes coming soon. She'd even started telling people around town that I'd been cut out of the will because my parents had discovered I'd been stealing from them, a complete fabrication that spread through Millbrook like poison. Mrs. Brennan, who'd been Mom's best friend for 20 years, actually crossed the street to avoid me at the grocery store. The pharmacist, who'd known me since I was in elementary school, suddenly needed to check inventory when I came in. Even at the coffee shop where I'd worked summers during high school, conversation stopped when I walked in, replaced by uncomfortable silence and avoided eye contact. Cassandra had been thorough in her character assassination, telling anyone who'd listen that I had a drug problem, that I'd been taking Mom's pain medication, that my parents had been planning an intervention before they died. The medication lie was particularly cruel because Mom had suffered from severe arthritis the last 5 years, and I'd been the one helping her manage her prescriptions, making sure she took them on schedule, driving her to doctor's appointments when the pain was too bad for her to drive herself. But Cassandra had twisted that into me having access to steal, and in a small town, the most dramatic story usually wins. I discovered more evidence of my apparent otherness in the attic. There was a box labeled Family Photos 1990 to 1994, and it was full of pictures of Mom, Dad, and baby Cassandra. They looked so complete, so perfect. A little family of 3 that clearly didn't need anyone else. Then there was a gap, almost 2 years with no photos, and suddenly I appeared as a toddler, wearing clothes that didn't match the careful way Mom dressed Cassandra, holding a teddy bear that looked older than I was. Megan came over that evening and found me surrounded by photo albums, crying over a picture of my first day of school, where I stood apart from the family, like someone had placed me in the photo after it was taken. She argued that I was letting Cassandra get in my head, that my parents had loved me regardless of biology. But then she pointed out something odd. In all the baby pictures of Cassandra, Mom looked exhausted but happy, the typical new mother. But in my earliest photos, Mom looked sad, grieving almost, even when she was smiling. Jake's response was less supportive. He suggested that maybe this explained why I'd always been so independent, why I'd never asked for help even when I needed it. He said it like it was a defect, like being adopted meant I was broken somehow. When I told him to leave, he actually said Cassandra had warned him I might become unstable when I learned the truth. They'd been talking about me behind my back, and he'd believed her over me. The revelation about Cassandra spreading lies became clearer when Derek called from his car one evening, whispering like he was afraid of being caught. He admitted Cassandra had been planning this for months, ever since Mom and Dad had updated their will 6 months ago. She'd hired a lawyer friend to look into inheritance law, specifically about adopted children versus biological ones. She'd been building her case that I was an interloper, someone who'd taken resources meant for the real daughter. He also revealed something that made my blood run cold. Cassandra had been stealing from our parents for years, taking money from their accounts, using their credit cards, even selling some of Mom's jewelry and replacing it with fakes. She'd taken almost $400,000 over 5 years, but she'd been careful about it. Small amounts that looked like normal expenses. Cash withdrawals that could have been for anything. Our parents had noticed eventually, Derek said, about a year ago, but they'd never confronted her directly because Cassandra had threatened to tell me about the adoption in the cruelest way possible, if they did. The thought that my parents had endured theft and betrayal to protect me from exactly what was happening now made me feel sick. They'd chosen my emotional well-being over their financial security, and Cassandra had used their love for me as a weapon against them. 3 days into my eviction notice, my phone rang at 7 in the morning with a call that changed everything. The man identified himself as Mr. Thornfield from Thornfield and Associates, my parents' attorney for the past 35 years. His voice was careful, measured, like someone who'd learned to speak in ways that couldn't be misinterpreted. He informed me that Cassandra had indeed shown him a will, but there were other documents she didn't know about, documents my parents had specifically instructed him to keep confidential until after their deaths. He suggested we meet, but not at his office, as Cassandra had been calling hourly with threats and had someone watching his building. Instead, he proposed the coffee shop on Maple Street at 2 o'clock. Before the meeting, I remembered something Derek had said about checking Mom's jewelry box. I found it in her closet. The painted blue flowers faded from years of handling. The bottom felt too thick, and when I pressed around the edges, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a safe deposit key and a note in Mom's handwriting that simply said, "For Alana, the truth matters." There was also an old padlock key that looked similar to the one Cassandra had confused for a house key at the locksmith, and I realized she must have found one just like it somewhere, and assumed it was important. Cassandra's campaign against me had intensified. She'd convinced Cousin Brooke and 2 others to sign statements claiming they'd witnessed me asking my parents for money repeatedly, that I'd been pressuring them to change their will. Brooke owed Cassandra $5,000 from a failed business venture, so her loyalty was clearly purchased. The other cousins had their own reasons involving promises Cassandra had made about the estate. The worst part was when she accidentally sent a text meant for Brooke to the entire family WhatsApp group. It read, "Remember, if anyone asks, Alana has been unstable for years. I've already told the lawyers she's been stealing. Once the house sells, you'll get your money plus extra for helping. Mom always said Alana was a mistake we had to live with, and now we can finally fix that mistake." The family explosion was immediate. Aunt Dorothy posted screenshots to Facebook with a scathing commentary about greed and disgrace. Uncle Pete called Cassandra directly and told her she was no longer welcome at family gatherings. Several cousins left the group chat in protest. Cassandra tried to claim her phone had been hacked, but the damage was done. Her own greed had exposed her. At the coffee shop, Mr. Thornfield was waiting in a corner booth with a thick folder. He looked like every old-fashioned lawyer from every movie, complete with wire-rimmed glasses and a suit that had probably been in style when he bought it in 1995. But his eyes were sharp, and when he started talking, I realized my parents had chosen their protector well. He began with a story from 35 years ago. My father's younger sister, Rebecca, had been 17 and pregnant. The father had vanished the moment she told him, and Rebecca herself was sick with a heart condition that made the pregnancy dangerous. My parents, newly married and trying for their own child, had taken Rebecca in. She lived with them throughout the pregnancy, and they'd promised to raise her baby as their own if anything happened to her. Rebecca died within hours of giving birth to me. She'd lived just long enough to name me Alana after our grandmother, and to make my parents promise I'd always know I was loved. The adoption had been legal and formal, making me their daughter in every way that mattered. But here was the twist that changed everything. Cassandra wasn't their biological child either. She'd been adopted at age 2 from Dad's cousin who couldn't care for her. She'd known this truth since she turned 18, and she'd used it as leverage against our parents ever since. Mr. Thornfield pulled out a document that made my hands shake. 20 years ago, when I was 9 and Cassandra had started her blackmail, my parents had created a trust. They'd placed almost everything in it, the house, the business, the investments, everything except about $50,000 in checking accounts. The will Cassandra had been waving around only covered what wasn't in the trust, and the trust had one beneficiary, me. If you're still listening to my story, I want to thank you again for being here with me through this. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know, and your support during this difficult time means everything. Mr. Thornfield explained that my parents had documented everything over the years. Every forged check Cassandra had written, every credit card she'd opened in their names, every piece of Mom's jewelry she'd stolen and replaced with fakes. They'd kept receipts, bank statements, photos of the fake jewelry next to appraisals of the real pieces. They'd built an airtight case but never used it because they still loved Cassandra despite everything, still hoped she might change. The $400,000 she'd stolen had come in waves. First, it was small amounts, a few hundred here and there that they attributed to their own forgetfulness. Then it escalated to thousands at a time, always with some excuse when questioned. Cassandra would claim she'd paid for things they'd asked for, house repairs that never happened, medical bills that didn't exist. By the time they realized the full scope, she was taking tens of thousands, and when they tried to confront her, she threatened to destroy me with the truth about my adoption. Derek had seen some of this documentation 2 weeks ago when Cassandra dragged him to Thornfield's office, trying to intimidate the lawyer into giving her everything immediately. While Cassandra was screaming about her rights, Derek had noticed papers on Thornfield's desk about the trust. He'd taken a photo when she wasn't looking, which is why he'd tried to warn me, though he was too scared of his wife to be more direct. Thornfield scheduled an official will reading at the courthouse for the following week. He warned me that Cassandra would likely escalate when she learned about the trust, but my parents had been specific in their instructions. They wanted the truth revealed publicly in front of witnesses, so there could be no question about their intentions or their love for me. The safe deposit box I opened that afternoon contained everything Thornfield had described, and more. There were letters from Rebecca, including one to her future child to me, saying she was sorry she couldn't be there, but she was leaving me with the best parents in the world. There were photos of Rebecca that showed we had the same eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same wild hair that never quite behaved. There was also a DNA test my parents had done when I was 5, confirming I was Robert's biological niece. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a journal Mom had kept. Entry after entry detailed Cassandra's escalating behavior, the pain of being stolen from by one daughter while trying to protect another, the impossible position Cassandra had put them in. One entry from last year read, "We failed Cassandra by giving her things instead of boundaries, but we will not fail Alana by letting Cassandra destroy her sense of self. The trust will protect her when we're gone." Cassandra, meanwhile, had already started spending money she didn't have. Derek called to warn me she'd bought a Range Rover on credit, joined the most expensive country club in the area, and hired contractors for a $200,000 renovation of my parents' house. She was so confident in her inheritance that she'd told everyone she was expecting over $3 million within the month. The town was starting to turn against her. Her behavior at the funeral, where she'd worn what looked like a rejected outfit from a reality TV show, all leather and lace at our parents' memorial, had already raised eyebrows. The locksmith had told everyone about her confusion with the keys. The bank manager had shared how she'd screamed about discrimination when they wouldn't give her immediate access to the accounts. Even her fake designer bags had become a running joke, especially after the handle of her Gucci bag had broken during the funeral reception, spilling its contents across the church floor. 3 days before the will reading, Cassandra decided to host what she called a memorial gathering at our parents' house. She sent out formal invitations on expensive cardstock, but the real purpose was obvious. She wanted to stake her claim publicly to show everyone she was in charge now. I wasn't invited, but Aunt Dorothy insisted on bringing me anyway. When we arrived, Cassandra had already removed Mom's beloved garden decorations and replaced the handmade welcome mat with something generic from a store. Inside, she'd laid out Mom's possessions like a garage sale, with little tags showing who would get what. Everyone was getting something except me, of course. She stood at the head of the dining room table, wearing white to our parents' memorial gathering, and started distributing items like she was dealing cards at a casino. When she put Mom's wedding ring on her own finger, I couldn't stay silent. I reminded her that Mom had promised that ring to me, had told me on her last birthday that it would be mine someday. The room went quiet. Cassandra laughed and said the gathering was for family only, real family. That's when Aunt Dorothy stood up and said I was more family than Cassandra was acting like. Several relatives nodded in agreement, and Cassandra's careful performance started to crack. That's when Mr. Thornfield walked into the memorial gathering, carrying his briefcase and wearing his best suit. He looked like a man on a mission, and his timing couldn't have been more perfect. The entire family was there to witness what happened next. He addressed Cassandra formally, using her married name, and informed her that the official reading of our parents' complete estate documentation would take place in 3 days at the county courthouse. He emphasized the word complete in a way that made Cassandra's face go pale beneath her spray tan. When she insisted she had the will and didn't need any formal reading, Thornfield smiled the way a chess player does before checkmate. He explained that while she did indeed have a will, it wasn't the only legal document pertaining to the estate. He'd been instructed by our parents to present all documentation publicly, in court, with witnesses present. Any attempt to dispose of estate assets before then would be considered theft. His eyes moved to Mom's wedding ring, which Cassandra was still wearing. She tried to pull the ring off, but her fingers had swollen from stress and too much wine at lunch. The entire family watched as she struggled, yanking and twisting, finally having to excuse herself to the kitchen for soap. We could hear her cursing and running water, and Uncle Pete muttered something about trash, always revealing itself eventually. When she returned, her finger was red and raw, and the ring was finally off. Aunt Dorothy had been secretly recording everything on her phone, pretending to take pictures of Mom's china. She'd captured Cassandra's speech about real family and biological rights, her claim that I was never wanted, and her attempt to sell off family heirlooms before the estate was even settled. The video was already being shared in the family group chat that Cassandra had been removed from after her accidental text revelation. The best moment came when Cassandra's latest fake designer bag, a poor imitation of Gucci with the logo spelled wrong, finally gave up entirely. The bottom seam split open, spilling everything onto Mom's dining room floor. Out fell 3 of Mom's credit cards she'd stolen, past due notices for thousands in debt, printed emails where she was trying to sell Dad's classic car before the estate settled, and most damning, a handwritten list titled After Inheritance that included paying off $60,000 in credit card debt and buying a vacation home in Florida. Derek picked up one of the credit card statements, his face going white as he read it. He asked her how they could possibly owe $40,000 to various stores when he thought they'd been saving for a house. Cassandra hissed at him that it would all be paid off once she got her inheritance, that he needed to think bigger, that they were about to be millionaires. But Derek had finally reached his limit. In front of everyone, he announced he'd seen the trust documents when Cassandra had dragged him to threaten Mr. Thornfield 2 weeks ago. He knew she wasn't getting $3 million. He knew about the thefts from our parents. He was done pretending this was normal or acceptable. The man who'd been too scared to stand up to her for 12 years finally found his spine, and it was in front of 40 witnesses. Cassandra tried to salvage the situation by claiming everyone was conspiring against her, that I'd turned the family against the real daughter. But Cousin Tyler, one of the ones she'd bribed to lie about me, suddenly spoke up. He admitted she'd promised him Dad's car if he said I'd borrowed money and never paid it back. Brooke, still owing her $5,000, stayed quiet, but her shame was obvious. As the family gathered their coats to leave, Cassandra made one last desperate play. She announced that anyone who sided with me would be cut off from the inheritance, that she had the power to ruin anyone who crossed her. That's when quiet Uncle Pete, who never said much at family gatherings, stood up and told her she was exactly the kind of person our parents had tried to protect me from. He said they'd be ashamed of what she'd become, and that was worse than any inheritance could fix. The courthouse, on the day of the will reading, was packed beyond capacity. Half of Millbrook had shown up, drawn by the promise of drama that had been building for 2 weeks. The court officer had to turn people away, and someone had even set up a coffee cart outside like it was some kind of festival. Cassandra arrived with 3 lawyers she couldn't afford, men in expensive suits who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized their client had lied to them about the basic facts of the case. She was dressed entirely in black this time, trying to look serious and bereaved, but she'd gone too heavy on the self-tanner the night before and looked more orange than mournful. I sat in the front row with Mr. Thornfield on one side and Aunt Dorothy on the other. Behind us, Derek sat alone, having arrived separately from his wife. The rest of the family filled the rows, and even some of Mom's church friends had come, perhaps feeling guilty about how quickly they'd believed Cassandra's lies about me. Judge Patricia Hoffman presided over the reading. She'd known my parents for decades, had bought her first house with Dad's help at the hardware store, and had zero patience for dramatics in her courtroom. When one of Cassandra's lawyers tried to object before Thornfield even started speaking, she shut him down with a look that could freeze fire. Thornfield began by reading the will Cassandra had been waving around for 2 weeks. It was real, properly executed 5 years ago, and it did leave $50,000 to Cassandra, along with some small, charitable donations. Cassandra smirked, thinking this validated everything she'd been saying, but Thornfield wasn't done. He pulled out a thick document and explained that 20 years ago, our parents had established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Family Trust. This trust contained the family home, the hardware business, all investment accounts, and approximately $3.1 million in total assets. The will only governed assets not already in the trust, which amounted to the $50,000 and some personal effects. Cassandra's lawyers immediately started objecting, saying they hadn't been informed of any trust. Thornfield pointed out that it was public record, filed with the court 20 years ago, and any competent attorney would have discovered it with even basic due diligence. The lawyers looked at Cassandra with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, realizing she'd led them into a humiliating situation. When Thornfield announced that I was the sole beneficiary of the trust, Cassandra shot to her feet and screamed that it was impossible, that I wasn't even their real daughter, that I was adopted and had no right to anything. Her voice cracked with rage, and spittle flew from her mouth as she ranted about blood rights and biological superiority. That's when Thornfield delivered the killing blow. He confirmed that yes, I was adopted, legally and formally, after my biological mother, Rebecca Whitehead, died giving birth to me. Rebecca was Robert's younger sister, making me his biological niece, a blood relative. But Cassandra? She was also adopted, taken in at age 2 when her biological mother, Robert's cousin Maria, couldn't care for her. The difference was that Cassandra had known about her adoption for 17 years, since our parents told her when she turned 18. The courtroom erupted. Cassandra stood frozen, her mouth open, unable to speak. Her entire narrative, her claim to biological superiority, her real daughter status, everything she'd based her cruelty on, crumbled in seconds. She'd tortured me with the truth about my adoption while hiding her own. Thornfield then started the video our parents had recorded. Mom appeared on the screen, looking directly at the camera, and even though I'd watched it once already in the safety deposit box, seeing her again made me cry. She spoke about how they'd loved both of us, how they'd tried to give Cassandra everything she demanded, hoping to fill whatever hole was in her heart, but how the thefts had started 5 years ago and escalated beyond forgiveness. Dad's part was harder to watch. He detailed finding forged checks, discovering credit cards in his name he'd never applied for, realizing Cassandra had sold Mom's mother's jewelry and replaced it with fakes. He showed receipts, bank statements, Photos comparing real jewelry to the replacements, $400,000 over 5 years, taken by the daughter they'd raised, while they protected the daughter they'd chosen from the truth being weaponized against her. The video continued with Mom explaining the most painful part. She said Cassandra had discovered the truth about my adoption through snooping in their papers when I was 9. She'd immediately used it as blackmail, threatening to tell me in the cruelest way possible unless they paid for her private college, bought her cars, funded her lifestyle. Every inequality in our childhoods that I'd wondered about had been extortion. They'd created the trust that same year, when I was 9 and Cassandra was 15, specifically to protect my inheritance from her greed. They'd known even then that she would try to take everything if given the chance. The lawyer who'd helped them set it up had warned them to tell me the truth, but they'd wanted to preserve my innocence, to let me have a childhood free from the knowledge that my sister saw me as an interloper. But the most shocking revelation was about the theft. Dad explained that they'd actually noticed the stealing much earlier than 5 years ago. Small amounts had been disappearing for a decade, but they'd made excuses, attributed it to their own forgetfulness. It was only when Cassandra got greedier, taking thousands at a time, that they'd been forced to acknowledge what was happening. They documented everything but never pressed charges because they still loved her, still hoped she might change. The video showed Mom holding up a box of evidence. Every forged check, every fraudulent credit card statement, every fake piece of jewelry, every receipt for things Cassandra had bought with stolen money. They'd kept it all, not for revenge, but for protection. They knew that someday the truth would have to come out, and they wanted me protected when it did. The final part of the video was them speaking directly to me. Dad said I was never a mistake, never unwanted, never second best. Rebecca had been Mom's best friend before becoming her sister-in-law, and they'd loved me even before I was born. When Rebecca died, they didn't see it as taking on a burden, but as receiving a gift, the daughter they'd been praying for. Mom's last words on the video were the ones that broke me completely. She looked at the camera and said that blood might make you related, but choice makes you family. And they'd chosen me every day for 29 years and would choose me again in whatever came after. She said the trust wasn't about money, but about protection, ensuring that their chosen daughter was safe from the one who'd chosen greed over gratitude. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for muffled crying. Even Judge Hoffman was wiping her eyes. The only person not crying was Cassandra, though not for lack of trying. The Botox had frozen her face so completely that she couldn't even produce tears properly, making her look even more inhuman in that moment of exposure. Cassandra's lawyers were already packing their briefcases, realizing they'd been brought here under false pretenses. One of them whispered to another that she'd told them I was a drug addict who'd manipulated my parents into changing their will. They wanted nothing more to do with her and were probably already calculating how to get out of the representation without getting sued themselves. But Cassandra wasn't done. She screamed that the video was fake, that I'd coerced our parents, that Thornfield was in on some conspiracy. She claimed the trust documents were forged, that the adoption papers were fabricated, that everyone was lying except her. Her voice got higher and more hysterical with each accusation until she was basically shrieking incoherently. That's when Derek stood up. In front of the entire courtroom, he announced he'd filed for divorce that morning. He said he'd watched her steal from her parents, lie about her sister, and destroy a family out of pure greed. He'd been weak and complicit for too long, but he was done. He actually apologized to me in front of everyone, saying he should have spoken up years ago but had been too cowardly. Judge Hoffman had heard enough. She banged her gavel and declared that the trust was valid and would be executed as written. I would receive everything in the trust, while Cassandra would receive the $50,000 from the will, though she noted that evidence of theft could lead to criminal charges that might affect even that inheritance. As if on cue, Officer Mitchell from the Sheriff's Department entered the courtroom. He announced that based on the evidence provided in the video and documentation, they were opening an investigation into fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Cassandra was being charged, and while she wasn't being arrested that day, she needed to surrender her passport and would be formally arraigned the following week. Cassandra's final moment of humiliation came as she tried to storm out of the courtroom. In her rage and hurry, she tripped over her own fake designer bag, the strap tangling around her heel. She went down hard, and when she hit the floor, her self-tanner left an orange smear on the white courthouse tiles. Someone took a photo that would circulate around Millbrook for months, with various captions about karma and falling from grace. 6 months have passed since that day in the courthouse, and life in Millbrook has found a new rhythm. I'm living in my parents' house, our house now, though it still feels strange to think of it as mine alone. The garden is thriving with the tomatoes Mom would have planted, and I've kept Dad's workshop exactly as he left it, down to the half-finished birdhouse on his workbench. Cassandra was convicted of fraud and elder abuse, though the judge suspended her sentence on condition of 500 hours of community service and full restitution. The $50,000 from the will went straight to legal fees, leaving her with nothing. The Range Rover was repossessed within a week. The country club membership canceled, and all those credit cards she'd maxed out expecting millions were now her problem alone. Megan saw her last week working at a phone case kiosk in the mall, trying to convince customers that bedazzled cases were worth $80. The designer clothes and expensive makeup were gone, replaced by the mall uniform and exhaustion. When our eyes met across the food court, she looked away first. There was no apology in her expression, just the bitter resignation of someone whose schemes had finally caught up with them. Derek sent me a letter last month, a real apology this time. He admitted he'd known about the thefts from the beginning, but had been too afraid of being alone to leave her. He was in therapy now, living with his brother, trying to understand how he'd become someone who could watch his wife destroy her family and say nothing. I wrote back that forgiveness was a process, but I was working on it. The cousins who'd lied for Cassandra had come forward with the truth once the video played. Brooke cried when she admitted Cassandra had threatened to call in her debt unless she supported the lies. Tyler confessed that the promise of Dad's car had seemed worth a small lie at the time. They were family, and families forgive. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. With part of the inheritance, I established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Memorial Scholarship at the community college. It's specifically for adopted children or those aging out of foster care, because family shouldn't be about blood or biology, but about choosing to show up for each other. The first recipient was a girl named Rebecca, which felt like a sign from somewhere. The hardware store is thriving under Uncle Pete's management. He's brought in his son James to learn the business, keeping it in the family the way Dad would have wanted. I stop by sometimes, and the smell of sawdust and metal still reminds me of Saturday mornings when Dad would let me help sort screws and bolts, never mentioning that I was probably making more work for him. Mr. Thornfield and I have lunch once a month. He tells me stories about my parents when they were young, about how excited they'd been when Rebecca came to live with them, how they'd prepared for my arrival like I was their own pregnancy. He recently told me that the teddy bear in those early photos, the one I thought looked old, had been Rebecca's. She'd insisted I have it, her last gift to the daughter she'd never raise. The truth about why my parents gave Cassandra more when we were growing up finally made sense when Thornfield showed me the full financial records. Every expensive thing Cassandra had received, the private school, the car, the trips, had been paid for with money from her biological family. Maria's parents, feeling guilty about their daughter abandoning Cassandra, had sent money for years. My parents had never touched it, saving it all for Cassandra's expenses. They'd been scrupulously fair, even when it looked unfair. Aunt Dorothy has become my closest confidant. She told me she'd been there when I was born in the middle of that snowstorm with Dad helping deliver me because the roads were impassable. She'd held Rebecca's hand while Rebecca held me for the only time, just long enough to whisper my name and make everyone promise I'd always know I was loved. Dorothy had kept that promise in her heart for 29 years. Last week, I was planting bulbs for spring when I found myself talking to my parents, telling them about the scholarship recipients, about the store, about how their tomatoes had won first place at the county fair. I told them about seeing Cassandra at the mall and feeling not anger, but pity. She'd had everything, parents who loved her, a sister who admired her, a husband who supported her, and she'd thrown it all away for money that was never really hers. The last time I saw her was yesterday at the grocery store. She was buying generic brands and counting change, the woman who'd once spent $40,000 she didn't have on credit cards. Our eyes met over the produce section, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret. But then she turned away, and I realized some people never learn that wealth isn't about what's in your bank account, but about who shows up when you need them. Standing in Mom's garden now, watching the sun set over the Connecticut hills, I think about what family really means. It's not DNA or blood tests or birth certificates. It's Dad teaching me to use a level, even though I was too young to really help. It's Mom saving for months to buy me the prom dress I wanted, even though Cassandra's extortion meant money was tight. It's Aunt Dorothy keeping a secret for decades to protect me. It's even Mr. Thornfield, who could have retired years ago but stayed on because he'd promised my parents he'd see their wishes through. Cassandra might have been right about one thing. I was adopted. But she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't a mistake or a charity case or an interloper. I was chosen, deliberately and lovingly chosen, by parents who protected me even from beyond the grave. They'd seen what was coming and built walls of legal documents and trust funds to keep me safe from the sister who'd chosen greed over family. Blood makes you related. That's just biology and chance. But loyalty makes you family, and love makes you chosen. And in the end, being chosen is everything.